Number 14 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October 19, 2020, the committee is resuming its study of the Pacific salmon. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of September 23, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. I would now like to welcome, of course, our witnesses today. We have Clifford Atleo Sr. from the Ahusat First Nation, Robert Chamberlain, Chairman of the First Nation Wild Salmon Alliance. From the Pacific Streamkeepers Federation, we have Zoanne Morton, Executive Director. From the Stolo Tribal Council, we have Chief Tyrone McNeil, Vice President and Tribal Chief. And from the Statlium Chiefs Council, we have Arthur Adolph, Director of Operations. We will now proceed with opening remarks from our witnesses. Mr. Atleo, you go first for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to say a few words in our language just very briefly, but I will interpret. On behalf of Hotway from Housing, I'd like to formally thank the House Standing Committee on Fisheries for the invitation to talk about a most important issue affecting the whole west coast of Canada. And in particular, our area is severely impacted by what we're talking about. I'll give you a little background in terms of pre-contact. Most streams and rivers contain salmon in British Columbia. Some had sockeye, chinook, some had both. Others had chum, coho, steelhead. Some had pinks. Larger rivers had all species, and Indigenous people managed them all very well. Since contact, the newcomers learned to harvest and process all species. Canneries existed on the Skeena River, Rivers Inlet, Fraser River, Nootka, CPC, Kildonan, Port Alberni, Victoria, Prince Rupert, Ballacoola, Namu, Tofino Inlet. I did make a mistake in my written document saying that I'm not aware of any canneries operating today, but there is one. It's called St. Jean's, and it's partly owned by First Nations people from New Channels. In terms of my history with fisheries, I grew up in a house and every family used to participate in a commercial salmon fishery. Our participation enabled our community to be self-sustained. We didn't have to travel far because we fished most of our local stocks. All species were plentiful. All Indigenous nations were similar to ours. We trolled and we gill netted and we seined. This was 60 years ago. Over time, our participation was reduced, as did the run sizes of all species. In the 80s, salmon farms were permitted to operate on the west coast of Vancouver Island, inlets and bays. It is around this time that the Canadian government used our trawlers to target U.S. Chinook stocks. The strategy was to force the U.S. into negotiating what became the Pacific Salmon Treaty. However, our West Coast Vancouver Island Chinook stocks were impacted negatively by this strategy as well. Our Chinook stocks have never recovered from that policy and the policies that allowed large numbers of open net pen fish farms to operate in West Coast of Vancouver Island waters. Other species have suffered as well. Our sockeye, chums, coho, and pinks, and steelheads actually should be on there as well. The existence of salmon farms along the west coast of Vancouver Island migration routes have severely impacted rebuilding efforts of all species. The management by the Department of Fisheries and Ocean has not helped either. The evidence is that with the newcomers, laws were enacted with good intentions, conservation being rather prominent in legislation, only to have DFO follow way short of upholding the law. DFO has the authority to manage with devastating results. This evidence of shortcomings in management results in the current dismal state of salmon stock coastwide. Poor logging and inappropriate land use policies by the BC provincial government has contributed to the destruction of salmon habitat. Functional habitat is required for long-term rebuilding of all salmon stocks in British Columbia. And poor action in addressing climate change by all governments is not helping either. Thank you.
Having trouble getting off mute. Thank you for that. It's not very often we get a witness that goes under the allowable time by a few seconds. I'm usually cutting people off before they're finished. Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Chamberlain for 5 minutes or less, please.
Gaelic Hamas the local athlete. We gachens hutli lachla man waslam katnala. When waslam genokai has local athlete. Just want to follow Cliff's lead, speak in my language a little bit, imploring you to hear the words that I have to say today on behalf of the hearts of the people of First Nations. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to you today about the state of BC's Pacific salmon. This is a critical topic to BC First Nations, as salmon are a primary traditional food source that are constitutionally protected and recognized by Canada's Supreme Court. In terms of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, wild salmon are considered or captured within a number of the areas, including food security, culture, traditions, education, environmental standards, and territorial decision-making, which of course means free, prior, and informed consent. This current government is beginning to set a table for the implementation of the United Nations Declaration, and free, prior, and informed consent must be a foundational component, especially to the current Discovery Islands fish farm consultations and accommodation process. To embrace the details that have been provided by the First Nations involved in this consultation to meaningfully implement the precautionary principle, especially given that none of the Fraser First Nations were included in the consultations that will further impact their Aboriginal rights. The crisis that is BC Pacific salmon simply cannot wait any stretch of time for the fulfillment of the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. With the historic low returns, notably to the Fraser River, this is clearly the beginning of a downward spiral to extinction. And I say this with no drama. Historic low returns equal historic low eggs being spawned in the Fraser River. Historic low spawning eggs equal historic low juvenile salmon entering the ocean. It is an accepted fact that only 1 to 4% of juvenile salmon return to be the next generation of spawning salmon. so we can reasonably and logically anticipate that we will experience further historic lows, continuing the downward spiral to extinction in the coming years. DFO Minister Jordan recently announced this government's response to Cohen Commission Recommendation 19. The announcement included the determination that open net cage fish farms of Discovery Islands area posed less than minimal risk or harm to Fraser River sockeye. This determination was founded upon 9 science papers that were so-called peer-reviewed through the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat, CSAS. The CSAS peer review process is horribly flawed and provides great opportunity for an extremely biased outcome. A proponent, in this case a fish farm company and fish farm industry associations, are involved in every component, every step of determining if their operations pose a risk to Pacific salmon, such as the steering committee developing the scope of the science, terms of reference, discussion paper development, and the peer review itself can be unduly influenced by industry as they can select who will participate in the peer review. This is far less an impartial nor objective that I and many First Nations, commercial and tourism industries, and Canadians that rely upon healthy and abundant wild salmon stocks would expect as a reasonable starting point. Decades of science that withstood international peer reviews were ignored, even though that process is far more rigorous and subject to a completely impartial review, assessment, and outcome. Sea lice was to be the 10th science paper related to the Cohen Recommendation 19 announcement in determining the minimal risk or minimal harm. Sea lice were admitted from this suite of science papers. This is extremely concerning as fish farms are located sequentially. Sea lice, this is extremely concerning as fish farms are located sequentially along key out-migration corridors of juvenile Pacific salmon and produce billions of larvae that reside in the upper water column where the juvenile salmon are to be found. Given that fish farms are located where there is good tidal flush, the juvenile Pacific salmon are brought in very close proximity of areas inundated with billions of sea lice larvae. Sea lice can physically kill juvenile salmon, but also change their behaviors, making them predation. Sea lice average, the sea lice conditions of license, the 3 sea lice average is the trigger for treatment on a fish farm. 3 sea lice may seem like an innocuous number, but considering that each fish farm has 500,000 to 700,000 Atlantic salmon, the number of sea lice becomes staggering. Also, the production of billions of sea lice larvae as well. Within the sea lice condition of license, there's an identified out-migration window for juvenile Pacific salmon, this being from March till June. The conditions of license are to provide special regulatory protection for juvenile Pacific salmon during this time. The conditions of license are completely and utterly untethered from juvenile Pacific salmon that they are designed to protect.
Okay, Mr. Chamberlain?
Monitor the presence of sea lice on juvenile wild salmon whatsoever.
Mr. Chamberlain?
If fish farm company is found to be out of compliance of the condition of liance.
Excuse me, Mr. Chamberlain.
42-day window. Oh, sorry. I'm hearing my own voice.
Yeah, well, that's because I've got my mic turned on. You've gone over time, so we have to end it there with regards to the testimony, but hopefully any you didn't get to say will be provided in the question and answer portion. We'll now go to Ms. Morton for 5 minutes or less, please.
I'd like to thank you for your invitation. Ooh, I'm hearing myself twice too. Is there a way to get rid of this?
Yeah, point of order, Mr. Chair. There's massive reverberation. I'm not sure why, but can we fix this before we move on? It's hard to follow the testimony.
Yeah, have any of the participants got a mic left on? Because I'm hearing my own voice back in my earpiece.
Mr. Chair, we'll suspend if it's okay with you for a second.
Okay, we'll suspend for a moment to check this out.
Thank you. I want to thank you for your invitation to present on the state of the Pacific salmon. I've been involved in many aspects of salmon, but my passion is with community engagement through the Salmonid Enhancement Program. SEP involves enhancement activities as well as programming such as stream keepers, stream to sea, community advisors, science branch, veterinary services, and resource restoration teams, which include an engineer and biologist. These were all brought together and built upon under the SEP banner since 1975 to assist the Pacific salmon. As I listened to witnesses, a big bar slide kept being referenced to. There was reference to the salmon being in jeopardy prior to this catastrophic event. It was this knowledge that led to the rewriting of the Federal Fisheries Act. The works done by this committee on the Fisheries Act assisted in the renewed federal act with meaning and intentions of rebuilding salmon runs and protecting salmon and their habitat. The Fisheries Act can be a strong tool, and we await the regulations to be written and followed that will allow it to live up to its potential. Back to the big bar and the response to this, there was questioning around, has there ever been a time in history where there was a slide of this magnitude? And Hell's Gate was brought up. While I wasn't there in 1914, I did work on the Hell's Gate tram in the summer of 1974 and got to inform thousands of interested tourists about the slide and the efforts that went into the building of the fishway to allow for the safer journey of our amazing salmon after years.
Ms. Morton, the interpreters are asking me to ask you to slow down.
I bet they are.
Just a little bit. They're good at their job, but they need it to be a little slower.
I worked on the Hell's Gate Air Tram in 1974 and got to inform thousands of interested tourists about the slide and the efforts that went into the building of a fishway to allow for the safer journey of our amazing salmon after years or decades of being blocked by rock and turbulent waters. The amazing part of Big Bar was the response, the coming together to fix it, the concern for the salmon, politics dropped away, and survival mode kicked in. It took just 5 days to put together the 3G unified command structure, a very different response than that from the slide of 1914. Studies that were undertaken in 1937 may have led to a pathway to follow. But in my estimation, it was the strength of the Salmonid Enhancement Program that provided the knowledge and staff that would be needed. The ideas flowed about how to fix it, and some parts could be hired out. Take this rock and put it there. But for many ideas, the SEP program staff were vital. Existing hatchery staff were brought in to assist in building holding areas and transport tanks. The resource restoration engineers helped build fish ladders and boulder structures. SEP managers were seconded to oversee the day-to-day operations, and area directors who knew the area and the local people came to assist. DFO Pacific Region has a small number of staff, but they hold the unique skill set that understands salmon, water, and landscapes. There was a team to turn to and lessons that had been learned. It's my understanding that the Big Bar slide, when it happened, the Seymour Salmonid Society was asked to share their experiences of the slide that blocked the Seymour River in 2015, saving hundreds of hours of research time. Communications. Big Bar was and is a big deal. People wanted to know what was happening, what was being done to fix this travesty. The communications tools that were put in place allowed for the participation of all to get the blow-by-blow as to what was happening, what was being tried, what was being worked on. Never before have I seen such an effort to engage the public to help unravel the story. This is a very complex problem that the public has a huge concern over. We know full well that salmon and their habitat are in peril. So where's the command center? Where are the communications teams allowing the public to see what is being done for the sake of our salmon? We have not become numb to the plight of Pacific salmon. It is why we are here today. It is why thousands of regular everyday, and some extraordinary, citizens have stepped up and volunteer with DFO's SEP programming. It is why we want to help the federal government undertake the changes that the Fisheries Act was rewritten to address. We want to assist in the protection and rebuilding of habitat that will help fish populations recover. Where is the 3G command center for the salmon today, where the work is done just for the sake of salmon, where the urgency is real, where those who can do, where acts, programming, policy, and regulations are drawn upon to ensure that the response to flooding is not just the erection of salmon-harming dikes, that economic pressures are relieved by rebuilding our salmon resources, not by exploiting the last few, where environmental conditions are to strive for the best conditions for salmon, not look at the very minimum before their demise, where we stop damaging and losing habitat and instead look to protect and preserve first, and then rebuild and restore what is lost. We recently almost lost a large part of the SEP programming through government reductions, and very soon after, we needed the skill sets and passions that these very people have to respond to the Big Bar. At this time, the number of resource people who understand salmon and salmon habitat is dwindling rapidly, and it is hard to replace them. We will need to focus on recruitment and training in order to have the expertise needed for today and for our future. It will take every partnership, process, and tool we have made and those yet to come. But if we truly have the will to address salmon rebuilding and protection, we have shown that we can work together for a common cause and have the pieces needed to create a pathway towards this goal.
Thank you, Ms. Morton. We'll now go to Chief McNeil for 5 minutes or less, please. You're on mute.
HGCM, Cocky Ice, Little Squeetles, Gastalo. Just thanking you for the opportunity to share here. Asking the interpreters to excuse me as I don't have prepared notes to share with them. So I'm thinking in preparing to appear before the standing committee and thank you for the opportunity to do that. I couldn't help but think of being about 7 or 8 years old with my late mother. This should be around 1968, 1969, something like that. And my mom was having a conversation with two other ladies about her age. And they're talking about how many fish they put away for the summer. And the one lady responded 108 and the other one 52. And my mom's response was 96. And they kind of chuckled at my mom because she, you know, being a big family, she only put away 96 jars of salmon. And this would be quart jars back in the day. And my mom responds, it's not 96 jars, it's 96 dozen quarts of salmon put away in one season. So it's this conversation, this narrative about where we are with salmon in today's state. I can't help but think of growing up on salmon like we did through all of our early years, right up until a point in time where the stock started declining and we had less and less access to fish. And also thinking about the other end of it, we've got some studies that showed that we as Stalo people, and what you know as the Fraser River, we know as a Stalo. It's the mother of all rivers. It's the food provider for us as Stalo people. When the first Europeans arrived on the shores, they calculated we consumed about 1,000 pounds of salmon per capita per year. as Stalo people, and they did other tribes around us, but we were by far the most in terms of consumption. So thinking of those two baselines in a narrative reconciliation, my community now consists of 1,000 people. Had we still been consuming salmon at 1,000 pounds per capita, that's £1 million a year. And we're certainly not anywhere near that, due only to how DFO regulates us and manages the fishery as a whole. So I'd really encourage folks to think about that impact of going from such sustenance to where we are now, where we don't even get a chance to fish every weekend like we did growing up. That if we have a wedding, we barbecue fish. If we have a funeral, we barbecue fish. If we have a birthday, we barbecue fish. And sometimes we barbecue or cook fish just for the fun effect, because it's in our blood, it's in our DNA. So thinking of that in a reconciliation manner, Mr. Chair, I would think that in this day and era of reconciliation, of the declaration, that folks like you and the department would be doing everything they possibly could to ensure that at a minimum our sustenance is met. And by doing that, you've got tools in front of you around the wild salmon policy, the Cohen Commission recommendations, the precautionary principle, the 10 principles that are supposed to be driving the federal bureaucracy, and in particular around the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Articles 18, 19, 24, and 38 really stand out for me, Mr. Chair. And so it's about utilizing existing tools that the federal government has at hand through the department, and what can be done to prevent any particularly man-made harm, knowing that there's climate change factors that we can do some things about, but we're in control of the man-made influences, and particularly around the open net pen fish farms and the migratory route, around the Discovery Passage in particular. Can't imagine the harm that those fish farms do on the migratory path when our salmon are out migrating right by these farms, and there's lice outbreaks on them, and DFO allows a 42-day window by those farms to respond to that lice. And in doing that, they're not monitoring the amount of lice that are on the wild salmon, period. So I think there's a missed opportunity in terms of using tools that people have available right here and now to better protect it, to do everything you possibly can to minimize the man-made impacts, the negative impacts on something that's so vital to us. It's more than a food source. It's a way of being. It's who we are as Stalo people and other First Nations as well. So thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chief McNeil. We'll now go to Mr. Adolph for 5 minutes or less, please. You're on mute.
Thanks, Mr. Ken McDonald, Chair, and the Vice Chairs, as well as the committee members for the invitation to present before the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. My name is Arthur Adolph. I'm from a community of Haklip, formerly known as the Fountain Indian Band, located overlooking the Fraser River, 15 kilometers north of Lillooet and 365 kilometers north of Vancouver. And I was chief for my community for 8 years and council member for 17 years. And my career began after graduating from high school when I enrolled in heavy duty mechanics, and until an industrial accident, after which I went back to school and received a BA in sociology and anthropology. And early in my life, when I was 8 months of age, my mother passed, and through custom adoption, Chief Sam Mitchell and his wife Susan raised me, who were 66 and 65 years of age respectively, and they immersed me and indoctrinated me in St'át'imc culture, traditions, way of life, and authentic St'át'imc ecological knowledge, as well as our St'át'imc language. And my presentation will be from this perspective, the importance of the Fraser River sockeye to our St'át'imc culture, way of life, and most importantly, our food security and well-being. Since time immemorial in early spring, with the annual beckoning calls of ecological and phenological indicators that begin at the valley bottom, with the blossoming of the buttercups, then the rose bushes, and shortly afterwards, the distinct clicking sound of the grasshopper we call tlicka-tlicka, to the mountaintop with the melting snow horse, all of which resonate throughout our territory for the Schleichlium annual return to our fishing ground and fishing rocks. Throughout Schleichlium territory, each one of our fishing rocks has its own distinct traditional name. And also at our fishing rocks are distinct rock markings left by the transformers. According to our legend, Coyote, one of the transformers, brought the sockeye from the coast to the interior, leaving his marks by our fishing rocks to remind us of his endeavors. In the Lillooet area, the Schleichlium are well known for our wind-dried salmon called Stlan. And prior to BC joining the Dominion of Canada in 1871. This food staple was well known to the Hudson Bay Company as well, who purchased substantial amounts for their staff stationed at the Kamloops Trading Post. Sam Mitchell, who was born on June 2nd, 1894, who raised me, stated that there used to be so much salmon at the Bridge River Rapids that you could almost walk across the river on their backs. In regards to the abundance of salmon, Michael Q stated that the heavy commercial catch was beyond the Aboriginal catch. Q also pointed out there was an abundance of sockeye in the Lillooet area, that over 23,580,000 sockeye passed by in the peak years and 5,050,000 in low years. CBC News reported on August 11th, 2020, that the Pacific Salmon Commission estimated that the pre-season Fraser River sockeye salmon forecast to be 283,000 sockeye for 2020. Last year's return of the Fraser River sockeye is 1.2% of the historical peak years of the sockeye return. The stat, as you are aware, the Cone Commission was initiated by the federal government on November 5th, 2009 to investigate the decline of the Fraser River sockeye. And the Cone inquiry concluded, bearing 75 recommendations to improve the future sustainability of the sockeye fishery. And one of the major components that we see is recommendation 3, which identifies the conflict with DFO, with their mandate, which promotes fish farms while protecting wild salmon. And so I'll move on to my conclusion. And so basically, in closing, using an analogy of big box stores, it is not like if we cannot go to Costco, we have the alternative to go to Walmart. This is not so if the Fraser River salmon become extinct. We do not have another alternative. Our Schleichlium culture, traditions, way of life, and well-being will all collapse, forcing us further into fourth world conditions within our own homelands.
Thank you, Mr. Adolph. I do realize you had more material there to say in your notes that were submitted, and once when they get translated, they'll be circulated to all the committee members to have for future reference. And anything you didn't get to say, hopefully will come out in the line of questioning. So we'll now go to our questions. Up first, of course, Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'd like to start out with Mr. Chamberlain first. Mr. Chamberlain, on November 30th, 2018, the BC government's Broughton Steering Committee submitted their consensus recommendations. These recommendations included one that First Nations-led monitoring and inspection program be immediately put in place to monitor fish health and screen for sea lice, pathogens, disease agents, and so on. My understanding is that CFIA and DFO do perform monitoring and inspections on open net pen salmon farms. Why was the monitoring and inspection program, the additional inspection and monitoring program, deemed necessary?
Thank you for your question. First off, we need to acknowledge that there is a clear lack of any measure of trust between the First Nations of British Columbia and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. I'm not trying to be untoward or combative. I'm just stating what I've seen and heard many times over. As a result of that, there is a very high level of mistrust of science. But in terms of DFO's monitoring of disease and sea lice on the fish farms, you have to understand that it's a monitoring program where they come by and they just check on the audit the fish farm company's work. And so I'm mindful of a recent science paper that spoke about how numbers were higher when the DFO was around and lower when they weren't. And so this is the kind of information that causes great consternation for First Nations, and having an independent monitoring and oversight by the standards that we insist upon, where DFO relies upon counting adult and sub-adult sea lice. We know that the ones that are in a smaller life cycle will grow into adults, so we consider counting those, which the department doesn't do, as well as science and the methodology.
Okay, thank you. Next, I want to move on to a question to our Ms. Morton from the Stolo and the other Fraser chiefs that are on here. As recently as late September, the fisheries minister was to make a decision on the net pen farms in the Broughton Archipelago. That decision was basically kicked down the road, and then there were to be consultations started with the 7 First Nations in that area. Does that constitute consultation? That was someone, I believe today, mentioned that the consultation hadn't taken part with those other First Nations. Does that consultation with the 7 bands or 7 nations in the area, will that be sufficient, or will it be another failed attempt at this government to form reconciliation? Ms. Morton, are you able to speak?
My last name is Morten. I think you might be thinking of Alexander Morton.
Oh, you're speaking on behalf of the Stolo?
No.
No, pardon me.
I'm a Stream Keepers.
Okay, well, Stream Keepers. Okay, pardon me. Chief McNeil.
Thanks for the question. We're extremely dissatisfied that the government originally committed to begin removing fish farms by September 30th as per Cohen, and at very last minute came up with an airy-fairy decision to allow them to stay there and then shoot for another date down the road kind of thing. But specifically to your question around consultation, the government is obliged to formally consult with those 7 closest First Nations. But I'm 1,000 kilometers away from them, and I'm directly impacted. I'm not potentially impacted. I'm directly impacted by those fish farms being there, and I've got no opportunity to consult at all. I can't remember the last time we engaged a minister or a deputy minister around a conversation around fish in general. Where too often we correspond to a minister and we get a non-response back that, it's not even worth the paper that's written on. So the government has to do a lot of work on consultation, thinking in particular Article 19 of the Declaration that's speaking to free, prior, and informed consent. Article 18 that speaks to our right to be involved in decisions that affect our rights. Fish are a big piece of our rights. And then in particular, Article 24 that speaks to protecting our food and our sustenance. And so the short answer to your question is that the federal government has completely dropped the ball with regards to consultation for those of us that aren't part of those 7 communities. But we do need to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to move on to another question and hopefully get a real quick answer from each of the participants today. When you look at the federal government's actions and investments, what is being missed in their efforts to rebuild salmon stocks? If, in other words, if there was one thing you were able to do to restore our wild Pacific salmon stocks, what would that be? And if I can, I guess I'll start at the top of the list with Mr. Atleo.
It would be to actually start recognizing the results of their management, which been poor management. And, you know, to have the province where they are untouchable, benefiting from the forest, but having a direct impact on rebuilding efforts, that is like a huge problem. So much more to say, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay.
J'aurais beaucoup plus à dire, mais je m'en tiens à cela. Alors, Monsieur Chamberlain, alors ce serait contenir le stock à l'intérieur des terres et c'est la première raison. Le deuxième sujet et le troisième aussi sujet, ce serait de travailler avec les Premières Nations.
Excuse me.
La traduction
I'm getting it translated to me
elle est remise en marche.
in French. Is anybody else having that problem?
I was as well.
Oh, okay. I got.
Is it me?
Nancy, can we check to see why that is coming through? Mr. Chamberlain, what have you got your translation set on?
I have it set to English.
Okay, yeah, okay. So yours is done right. So that's what should be. Shouldn't be any translation. The only translation to French should be for Madame Gill or anyone that has selected French.
Well, do you want me to speak again?
Yeah, if it seems to be working now, yes. There's limited time because
yes, I understand.
The time expired when Mr. Arnold finished asking his question, actually. But I'll allow a quick answer from you, Mr. Chamberlain.
Land-based closed containment now, and working with First Nations across the province to identify rehabilitation efforts and get strategically out of the way and let salmon come back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chamberlain. We were okay. We're getting that echo sound again, Nancy.
Thank you to let me know. Do you want to suspend or you want to continue and we try to fix it at the same time?
Okay, I'm not getting it now. I'm getting it from my mic. I don't know why. It's anybody else getting an echo?
Yep.
Yeah, everybody else, committee members are getting an echo. We'll suspend for a moment, Nancy, and you can get a check, please.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. The whole issue here is to try and figure out what we have to do to rebuild abundance in those fish stocks. So this is not about, how we, share the catch between all of the various interests. This is about making sure that there are more salmon. And this is difficult. We've had the example, and our chair knows only too well the example in Newfoundland. We're building back the stocks of cod after everything was shut down, and we're still not back yet. So this is not easy. So there are two things. First of all, we hear you, and we've heard so many people express a lack of confidence in the DFO. So in your opinion, who best, if anybody that you can think of, who best is in the position to lead the effort that it's going to take to really get serious about rebuilding our salmon stocks? I'll throw it wide open. If you have a thought, put your hand up, and I'll call on you. Okay, Robert?
I believe First Nations are. A lot of these river systems and watersheds are in very remote locations where you'll find First Nations. There's a lot of cost savings to be enjoyed in the effort, as well as the traditional ecological knowledge.
Thank you. Adolf, your thoughts, sir?
Yeah. Actually, I was just echoing Robert Chamberlain as well. I think basically if we really want to take a look at reconciliation and implementation of UNDRIP, and then we really need to take a step back and take a look, well, where did we actually go wrong in regards to looking at the management of land and resources, and what was missing was our traditional knowledge, ecological knowledge, because basically for over 15,000 years, we had land and resources that sustained us for, generations and generations, but it just started collapsing within the last 150 years. So we need to incorporate that led by Indigenous people.
Cliff, would you say the same thing? Mr. Atleo?
Yes. Yes, I definitely would, because we have offered our help to the department many, many times to no avail. They continue to be like, we are in charge, we're the ultimate authority, and we are the best managers in the world. All of it, of course, proven by the state of our stocks today. I think that we only have a few thousand years of experience. What people don't think about is when the newcomers arrived, every stream was a producer. Every river had multiple species that were reproduced, and that was not by accident. And First Nations were many more in population than even we are today. And those rivers and streams sustained us because of good management. We know we can help. Just be open to it.
Chief McNeil, anything to add to that?
But in support of us as rights holders being more involved, we do have existing mechanisms that DFO chooses not to empower. For example, we have 74 communities signed on to the Fraser Salmon Management Council. From there, we've selected the Fraser Salmon Management Board in partnership with DFO to actually manage Fraser-bound salmon. But DFO doesn't fund it appropriately, doesn't populate the committees appropriately. So it's a vehicle without wheels. But we built the vehicle with DFO. We just need them or somebody to put some wheels on it and allow us to occupy that space that's described in that agreement.
Right. Ms. Morton, you and I have had chats over actually a number of years now out in the Maple Ridge Pit Meadows area. I know you've been very active on the ground, literally there. One of the concerns that I thought I heard you express some time ago, and I wanted to get the current state, is, are there changes taking place at the municipal level or the provincial level that are affecting the ability of streams to support salmon? Have riparian setbacks been changed? Are too many exceptions being allowed? What's going on there at that level that works against us restoring these stocks?
Well, in Maple Ridge, you have people wanting to build in the floodplain, so that might free part of it. We have riparian area regulations, but the omnibus person said that they're not working, and then that was the end of it. You just got the report is not working, but nobody looks to try to make them actually work. We have a Fisheries Act now in place, but we have regulations that are either ignored or not strong enough to do anything. This week, I've got Spanish Bank Creek, or the Beaver Creek in Stanley Park has been drained. We had spawners in there 2 weeks ago, and now it's without water. If you go with Metro Vancouver, you can have the day-to-day, moment by moment, how many sewage spills are released into the Fraser River and into Keith Creek that goes into Lynn Creek. We have fish passage issues. We have all these issues that have paperwork to go along with them to say this isn't going to happen, but it keeps happening.
All right. Do I have much time left, Mr. Chair? You're on mute. Oh, I got to do that.
You have 6 seconds. So that's hardly time to ask a question and hardly time to get an answer. So okay. I'll bank that 6 seconds for somebody else. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all the witnesses for having joined us here today. I have a question about the First Nations and the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Many of you have spoken about this. I've heard some comments, but I'd like you to tell me more about the loss of confidence in the DFO. And of course, I'd like to hear as well what could be done to regain trust of First Nations peoples. And the question is for all of you chiefs.
First?
Yes, go ahead.
Actually, I think what really needs to be done in order to have DFO restore their confidence is there really needs to be one law for all. Because basically back in 1979, I went fishing down at our fishing rocks, and I caught 4 fish. And DFO came in on a helicopter, and 3 of them knocked me to the ground and charged me for fishing. But yet, 2 kilometers down the river towards Lillooet, there was sports fishermen, and they were fishing on both sides of the river. And DFO didn't come in with their helicopters and knock them to the ground and charge them for fishing. As well as when we take a look at the Mount Poly mining disaster, this was devastating to the fish salmon habitat as well as to the salmon in regards to the spill. This was one of the worst disasters, mining disasters in Canada, and yet DFO did not charge Imperial Metals, who owns the mine. And yet, we get charged as Indigenous people for catching 4 fish, and but others are not charged.
Mr. Chamberlain?
The long mistrust has been in place ever since the government has consistently disregarded the Supreme Court of Canada rulings. We've seen it played out with the Mi'kmaq moderate livelihood recently. I can't remember a time since the Sparrow decision that there has been a true allocation consistent with that Supreme Court law. I believe now that the DFO minister needs to make the proper steps, respect the state of Pacific salmon, make the decisions that are going to benefit wild salmon without exception, and to fulfill the obligations or the commitment for land-based closed containment, not just a plan, but remove this known threat that's within reach so we can then get on with the other aspects of stress to the Pacific salmon. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Atleo, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think that racism is a real problem within the department, and it needs to be addressed, precisely why Mr. Adolph mentioned his story, his personal story. We have all witnessed racist attitudes within the government, and the confidence will not return without actually addressing and acting on eliminating and maybe providing zero tolerance for racism. That would go a long ways if we actually added that and worked at it, not just the government by itself, but us helping, because they need to understand who we are, where we've come from, and what we're able to do. Thank you.
Chief McNeil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Three things jump to mind in response to that is that, firstly, to implement Sparrow. And by that, I mean, for us in the Lower Fraser, we typically go after what's called early time Chinook. But the way DFO manages a fishery, they allow the marine recreational sector to get their full feed on it. And by the time the early time Chinook reach the Fraser River, there's not enough for us to access. So they're not implementing Sparrow. Secondly, take the open net fish farms mandate away from DFO because it's in too much conflict. They can't do fish farms and protect wild salmon at the same time. They default to support farms over wild salmon. Thirdly, the Fisheries Act right now suggests an ecosystems-based approach to the management of the fisheries. And I really encourage that because the current management regime by DFO is simply access and nothing else. Although they do have a broader mandate, put it at the table and do it, particularly with us. Thanks.
I don't know, Ms. Morton, if you have a comment?
I don't know that it was there, but I do find that for years ago, fisheries used to have consultative processes for community at large and anyone could attend. I can't even think of the last time that they did have that consultative process, but the last time that they did, the facilitators wrote the answers down without listening to the people that were speaking. What we were saying, they would stand with their hands by their side and not write things down. And then when we weren't speaking, words magically appeared on the screen. So consultative process died a long time ago, and it would be nice to renew it in a new fashion with new people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Gill. Your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for your important work around fighting for wild Pacific salmon. I also want to thank, obviously, Wickaninnishu's the head of the Council of the Hot Whale for being here, because I am in Newfoundland territory today. And I'll start with you, Wickaninnish. Can you speak about the BC Salmon Restoration Fund right now is an agreement between the province and the federal government. It's $142 million over 5 years to invest in restoration. Right now, we're seeing many projects denied in our region as well. We've seen a 3% of the normal return or the traditional return in the Tranquil and in rivers in your territory. Can you speak about how important it is the government urgently increase that amount? Many people are saying we need 5 times that. That 142 million is just over 5 years, that we need that every year. Can you speak about the importance of that and the opportunity for reconciliation in investing in that?
Yes, thank you for the question, Gord. You know, when the modern day treaty making process began in the early 90s, we actually sent out our staff from the tribal council to all the areas on the West Coast. Politically, they were north, central, and southern regions of Newfoundland. And we estimated in the early 90s that it was going to require at least $90 to $100 million for habitat work restoration. And then a few years later, toward the end of the 90s, the government announced this restoration fund for 5 years of $75 million, which is really a pittance. And subsequent to that are the additional funds that you talk about. You know, I think that the province is actually being left off the hook until now, where they actually contribute just a wee bit, despite the fact that they have benefited the most from the destruction of habitat and has really prevented the ability of our people and our nations to actually get serious about restoration.
Do you believe that the minister seeing a 3% return in the Tranquil, seeing the lowest recorded return in the Fraser 2 years in a row. Do you believe that the minister is acting with the sense of urgency and that it's even she hasn't even come out and said it's a salmon emergency? Can you speak to that? Do you feel that she's taking this serious enough?
Yeah, sure. Actually, there's been very little urgency on the part of government with regards to what we're experiencing here. And I recall the minister being out here with the Stalo when they were going to formally sign that Fraser Management Council agreement. And we were fortunate to be invited to that because we've always supported that initiative. And the slide had occurred a week before. And the leaders of the Stalo got together and put a resolution and put it to the government. They said, you got to act now. And it was only then that activity started to happen. Prior to that, there was next to nothing. And so there really has been a huge separation or gap or connection, lack of connection with reality from out here. And so the importance of actually listening and hearing our leadership becomes rather critical.
Mr. Chamberlain, you probably heard the testimony on Monday, and we had the minister made a mandate. In the mandate letter, she said that she would work with BC and Indigenous communities to create a responsible plan to transition from open net pen salmon farming in coastal BC waters by 2025. We heard from industry on Monday that they didn't believe the transition was to closed containment or to land-based. Can you tell me what you thought or you interpret what that transition was meant in that mandate letter?
I can tell you that I've worked and identified 102 First Nations in British Columbia that support the transition to land-based closed containment. And it's because now people have become more in tune with just what the impacts represent. And the fact is, this is something that needs to happen. When we heard of the announcement and we read the words, it was to transition, not to develop a plan to transition. And to know that the 102 First Nations across BC support this government in that action. And by doing so, it would approach a very broad stroke reconciliation effort across the province. And it can go a long way to remove what is understood as systemic racism based upon 21 years of ignoring the Mi'kmaq, the Marshall decision, as well as all these years without meaningfully implementing the Sparrow decision. How else can that be viewed from a First Nations perspective other than systemic racism?
Can you speak about the importance of Cohen number 3 about removing the mandate of DFO to both be the protector of wild Pacific salmon and also the agent for the industry? And can you also speak about conditions of license when it comes to sea lice and their approach to industry?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. When I think about the conflict of interest and you look at the Canadian Scientific Advisory Secretariat, CSAS, this is such a confirmation that the conflict and bias is built in every aspect of DFO and fish farm industry. And so this is something that must change. When you consider the condition of license, there is, if you have 3 average sea lice producing larvae on a fish farm, it triggers the need by regulation to treat the farm. Well, 3 sounds innocuous, doesn't it? Innocuous. But when you consider there's 500,000 to 750,000 fish on each fish farm, you're getting into the millions of sea lice producing larvae, which of course means billions of larvae in the upper water column where the Pacific salmon are migrating through. It's a clear threat. It's a clear impact. And with the condition of license, there is no monitoring of how many sea lice are on the juvenile salmon. So it's completely untethered from what it's intending to protect. And the biggest farce of it all is the 42-day window that's given to industry if they're out of compliance. So when you think about the reporting, the response, the 42-day window, you now have an industry coast-wide that's allowed to operate in defiance of regulation during that critical outmigration window. It's absolutely useless, and it is not looking after wild salmon.
Thank you, Mr. Jans. Gone a bit over time, but I wanted to hear the answer. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the testimony that I've heard today, and I've not only been educated a lot, I've been entertained at times during this meeting. So I appreciate the good nature in which we're discussing a very serious issue. I think there's everybody in the room right now wants the same thing. They want the protection, longevity, and health of wild Pacific salmon. I don't think anybody here wants anything but that. So I'm going to ask a little bit along a bit of a different line of questioning. When it comes to abundance, and Mr. Hardy and I would agree on this particular point that the issue is abundance. It's abundance for commercial fishermen tell us that there's a lack of DFO is mismanaged. There's no more abundance. Sport fishing and recreational fishers would say that DFO is mismanaged and there is no abundance anymore. And of course, First Nations would also, yourself included today, say that there's issues in regards to abundance, and I don't think anybody's disputing any of that. But I do want to talk a little bit about what some of the potential options are going forward, rather than just looking at one or two options. I think there's a couple other opportunities that are available, and one of them would be the potential use of hatcheries, not as a permanent solution, but as an interim solution to increase abundance, to restore stocks. Of course, there's going to be ongoing efforts for cleaning up our streams and making them more productive, but also the use of selective gear to ensure that wild salmon are given every opportunity. Can any of you, or would any of you want to talk to what changes we can make, whether it's the harvest taken by First Nations along the freshwater or along the coast, or whether it would be sport fishers or others? What are the sacrifices or ideas that we can make in order to ensure that wild salmon are allowed to return to spawn, and we can use different vehicles? Because what we're doing right now is basically watching salmon disappear. We have to do something different. What things could we do different other than just closing or moving the fish farms? That doesn't. I don't think that's going, in and of itself, is going to solve the problem. What other things can we do, and who would like to take a shot at that?
I would.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, I think what we could do right off the bat is, because of the amount of money that was spent on the Cohen Commission, we should really take a look at what came out of that report and ensure that every recommendation that was identified, it needs to be implemented. But first and foremost, I really think the appropriate way that we need to look at restoring the Fraser River wild salmon is we really need to take a look at all the impacts. What are the impacts to the salmon? What are the impacts to the habitat? And then take a look at what is causing all this. And once we've understand all this, and then we come up with a methodology in regards to addressing all the impacts to the fish, all the impacts to the habitat, and hopefully we'll see out of all our work and what the Cohen Commission recommendations is that you will see an abundance of salmon, and rather than what DFO is doing right now is in denial and not really taking in consideration the full implementation of the recommendations of the Cohen Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Adolph. Madam Wharton, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'd agree that we should look at the Cohen Commission again, and not just say working on this, but actually say how that we're working on it. But I remember my first day on the Fisheries Renewal Board of Directors and coming in and Jory Thorkelson mentioning, how come the only salmon that we talk about as being removed from the system are the adults, the set of adults? Why are we not looking at when a cow steps on a red? Why are we not looking at water pollution? Why are we not looking at all the other ways that salmon die? And that's something I'd very much like to see, is where are salmon dying, at what stage in their life cycle? And when they do come back as pieces, as they're called, we're finding a lot of the coho are pre-spawn mortality due to, I think, the water quality issues, and they're dying without laying their eggs. So it's fine and dandy to have a fish come back, but they are not providing the next generation for us. And I think we have to look at that full cycle and where are our fish disappearing in that cycle.
Mr. Chamberlain?
I just want to jump on the comment about pre-spawn mortality. This is something that occurs, or one of the indicators is liver problems and other organs being tipped over by Piscine reovirus becoming HSMI and the lysing or the explosion of red blood cells. It's one of the contributors to pre-spawn mortality. In terms of how do we move forward, we need the government to implement Cohen, not act upon them, because I think that includes the disregarding of important pieces. But there are a number of First Nation reports, including one from the First Nation Wild Salmon Alliance, the First Nation Leadership Council, and the provincial government that articulates a path forward to rehabilitate salmon. We've got the plans. We need an investment similar to what Washington State is doing in regards to the true value of healthy and abundant wild salmon stocks.
Thank you, Mr. Calkins. We've actually gone way over, actually. We'll go to Mr. Hardy now for 5 minutes or less, please.
Oh, my goodness. So many questions and so little time. I'm looking at Cohen recommendation number 4, which said that they were to create a new position in the Pacific region at the Associate Regional Director General level, with responsibility for developing and implementing the wild salmon policy, supervising the expenditure of funds, et cetera, et cetera. It's been all these years. I've had the opportunity to ask them 2, if not 3 times, why they have not established this position. But based on what I heard you say on my first question, can I suggest that the position should not exist in the DFO? So if it shouldn't exist in the DFO, should it exist, period? And if so, where? Anybody got a comment on that?
I'll jump in. See, this is a great example of what I just mentioned, where the government can say that we've acted upon that recommendation, but disregarding it or dismissing it is acting upon it. It's not implementing. I believe that with the set of recommendations being as broad as they are, there is a need for such a position, whether it's inside DFO or inside First Nations. And I think if the government wants to get very serious about the concepts of reconciliation, the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, we have to think outside the box. We can't think within the confines of existing structures. So we need to create a position that is of equal status as what you just described for First Nations, to be a linkage between the 3 levels of government, being federal, provincial, and First Nations.
Actually, I'd like to build on that a little bit, Robert, and I'll invite the others to chime in. We've had a situation on the East Coast with the lobster fishery, and we've spent a lot of very productive time studying that. And one of the things that has emerged, at least from my observation of it, is that there hasn't been sufficient collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishers to try and sort things out, so you come to an accommodation and you come to something, an arrangement that works. What's your reading on the state of that relationship in British Columbia? So for instance, if we were to turn all of this over to you guys to do, would you be in a position to marshal, the energy and the creativity of the non-Indigenous fishers to actually get their contribution to this?
I would think that yes, we could. Given the fact that we have Supreme Court law which gives footing for the government to act and to pursue reconciliation on something that's so heavily nested inside the United Nations Declaration, and given the crisis that is Pacific salmon. And of course, if we were just talking Cohen, we'd be talking about Fraser sockeye. We're talking Pacific salmon across the province. What DFO has done with the programs and so on that they've moved forward with, be it AIROM or AFS, is they've compartmentalized the discussion to different places around the province, where we need a very broad and cohesive plan informed by First Nation. But that's not going to happen unless there's a key decision and resourcing made from the government to facilitate such a bringing together of all the technical pieces and formulating into a province-wide strategy, which then can be brought together with the federal provincial governments. And of course, the message of reconciliation is not just a Crown initiative, but is something that needs to be communicated to society at large. And I think that salmon and the rebuilding can be a unifying experience for stream keepers, for commercial fishermen, sport fishermen. They've all been brought together primarily this past year that I've worked on in relationship to the fish farm impact. But it's something to build upon that we could capitalize on right now if we were serious about it, if the government was.
Okay. I want to just run through a list of the conditions that I think are contributing to the problem that we have. The factors in the abundance of fish have to do with fishing effort, predation, climate change, and habitat change in habitat or destruction of habitat. Is there anything else? Are we missing anything off that list that we also have to think about when it comes to restoring abundance in salmon? Any thoughts? Yes, Cliff. Oops, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I think that we need to actually connect all the dots. Society is a labeled society, and it works to our disadvantage when we try to deal with rebuilding, because all of those things that you mentioned are interrelated.
Sure.
The habitat is important, and of course, the management is also important. In our view, management is not accountable to anyone. They're not accountable. And that should never be with any government agency responsible for natural resources. When the government makes a mistake in management, who do they answer to? No one. And that should never be. We never had that in our history of governance of First Nations people. We made sure we looked after, and we eliminated housing concerns, hunger concerns. We looked after everything. And the government needs to actually adopt that principle. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hardy. You're going way over time. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for all of the chiefs. I'm sorry if I'm asking it in a very candid way. We just finished a study on the crisis in Nova Scotia. It is still a crisis over there. As an elected person, I care about people's well-being, and I see many parallels between the two situations, although there are also many differences. When we talk about sustenance and when we talk about rights, we must prevent, instead of find a solution after there's a problem. What can we do to avoid a similar situation on the West Coast?
Well, I'll jump in. Thank you very much for your question. I think that we need to understand where is it that are the man-made government-controlled opportunities to affect change in whatever industry it may be that is harming wild salmon. We are challenged with global warming, warming ocean, lack of food, things that we can't reach out and change. But there are things that we can, and I think a strong partnership federally and provincially would be beneficial, because many of the contributors to the demise are provincial, whether it's forestry, whether it's mining, whether it's farming. But we need to come together and provide the resources necessary. And as I believe that Cliff identified earlier, what's come forward is a pittance. $120 million over 5 years is not going to do what's necessary. Thank you for your question.
Chief McNeil, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I say this, I respond in the context of Bill C-15, where quite often we're educating everybody, including commercial and recreational fishers, on our rights, say, for example, regarding sparrow. The federal government should be assisting us in that role, because if it's First Nations standing alone, like on the East Coast, you're going to get that racist attack by the public. But if you have the federal government standing with us, with an understanding what our rights are, and moving that way forward, we bring in our local rights to bear, we could actually bring the province in with a similar conversation. So we could have a tripartite agreement between British Columbia, First Nations, and the federal government in a collective, positive, looking forward way, as opposed to being reactive later on down the road, which is so harmful, but from an uneducated public. So let's educate them collaboratively. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe Wiccan, can you speak about the precautionary principle and how DFOs applied that to herring or to the PRV and sea lice in terms of fish farms, forage fish, like a whole of ecosystem approach, and in terms of management?
Oh my gosh, you got a whole day. No, I think that the government agencies have often used words to kind of appease the public in terms of what is actually going to happen. And this word came around, precautionary principle. The assumption is that you're going to be more careful, right? in how you manage. And we've never witnessed that. We've never seen them actually apply that principle, whether it's to do with actual fish management or herring fisheries or fish farms. In fact, the reality is the government was actually funding the growth and development of fish farms, while actual management funds were being decreased considerably, coast to coast to coast. I think that's something that many people don't look at. Is in fact the budget for the fish farms were going up and management monies were going down. That doesn't add up, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up to actually upholding what your law says you're supposed to do.
Can you speak about the fish farms a little bit? What would you like to see happen in terms of protecting wild stocks and the fish farms that are in Clayoquot Sound, for example?
Well, I don't know when people are going to start paying attention to what actually is happening and what has been happening. Cohen revealed it and reported on it and recommended accordingly. And what have we done? The date came and went.
Yeah.
Nothing has happened. There has been no contribution of any kind of investment to shore-based facilities. Only one on Vancouver Island. And it stopped there. Thank you.
Bob, did you want to add anything?
I think, Cliff's on the right track there about land-based closed containment. With such a broad First Nation supporter on the province, I have spoken and engaged with leadership for the past year very intimately. And I can identify no less than 5 or 6 First Nations extremely interested in that economic development opportunity. And we can then start to, if we view this as some sort of a measure to protect wild salmon, an economic stimulus, ECDEV for First Nations, there's a lot of ways that we could shape this where we can come out much further ahead with proper and adequate protection. In terms of the precautionary principle, it ranks right up there with adaptive management. I've never seen it in regards to fish farms. I just simply haven't. And any adaptation was more of an obfuscation of science or pretending to make changes that are going to protect something, but all they're protecting is the function of the fish farms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Mazer for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presenters. On the precautionary principle, I'm from agriculture, being from the prairies. The way it's used in agriculture is just keep everything the same, don't change it. So you just keep on, it's kind of insanity. So that's the way the precautionary principle is applied in agriculture. As far as there was comments, Ms. Morton, about where are the salmon dying? Has there been any studies, any data? I think you brought up, in the streams, where are these salmon dying? What is the biggest cause of taking salmon out prematurely? Has there any knowledge on that? And maybe we should look there. I think she mentioned cows, stepping on cows. I don't know. How do you answer that? I guess I'm being new to this committee. I don't know what I'm going to get for an answer here. So what kind of information is there about predation, and where should we be looking at that?
We talk about the death by 1,000 cuts when we talk about the death of salmon, that it's not just one thing, whether it's, human predation or whether it's a bear or an eagle or lots of others who have a right to those salmon as well. But I haven't seen, and I've seen a lot of studies, and I haven't seen a study that has that comprehensive look as to which industry or which place kills the most of the salmon, whether it's one spill at a time, like the poly mines, or whether it's dewatering of streams, or whether it's the flooding in the Kamloops area. That's the huge one right now.
Could it be just natural predation too? Like you say, the eagles, the bears, the seals. I don't know. Like, I mean, could it be just nature doing its thing? Like, how much background, natural background that is just sitting there that look at this, something's going on in nature that's never been studied then on the West Coast?
Yeah, there's little bits of studies here and there, but I've never seen a complete one. But if we look at just poly mines by itself and how many died in that one incident, a lot of eagles would have to eat for that.
Well, true. Okay. But yeah, it's a pretty big area though too. So DFO, and this is coming across from the East Coast. Ms. Gill talked about it. Coming to the West Coast is this common link of DFO and non-action. And you talk about the Cohen report. When was the Cohen report done? Any one of you, Mr. Chamberlain or Atleo?
8 years ago.
8 years ago? Okay, and was there at that time in action, like did the groups all get together and say, okay, here's our next steps? There was nothing in that Cohen report that was as far as
First Nation organizations, Union of BC Indian Chiefs, First Nations Summit, and the BCAFN all passed resolutions supporting the full implementation. And then we've been misdirected by government saying we've acted upon, whereas what they're saying is we didn't implement, we just ignored them. Right. Okay. So what we haven't had a substantive dialogue. We've just had more, what I always call as deny, delay, and distract.
Yeah. Do you think it's gotten, the denial, the distractions has gotten worse in the last couple of years?
Oh, absolutely.
From the department? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then why? And I would like to know, why do you think this is all being ignored?
Well, I think it's continued when you look at the 9 science papers and the faulty CSAS process. This is another delay, distract. When the consultation that I've been involved with 3 First Nations on Discovery Island wanted resourcing, we said, sorry, there's no resourcing, but maybe in the next round of work, which Mr. Beach is going to be taking on. And then when you think about the deny and delay and distract, well, you've got DFO saying sea lice isn't going to be a part of the assessment, but we found in the documents in the 2018 that DFO identified within their science that sockeye are more susceptible to sea lice. Yet on their website it says no, it's the Atlantics, and the guy that was part of this paper didn't even include neither of that in the PowerPoint he shared for consultation. And so when I think about just that as one small example, they themselves are contradicting. How can you say that there's conclusive science? And if there's absence of conclusive science, the precautionary principle must be implemented. And part of the problem is there is simply no policy to guide the implementation of the precautionary principle for aquaculture. And there's so many things I'd like to say, but I know we have a time limit.
Yeah.
Time is up, Mr. Major.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
5 minutes don't be long going when you're hearing interesting testimony. We now go to Mr. Batiste for 5 minutes or less, please.
Just want to thank you all for opening up with your Indigenous languages. As a Mi'kmaq language speaker, it's always great for me to hear other languages. And I also want to thank you for your continued advocacy in speaking of UNDRIP. And many of you may know that my father was part of the initial UN Indigenous Working Group that drafted UNDRIP. And so I'm going to ask 2 questions, and I'm going to open up to the floor because you probably all have recommendations on this. But do you think that the implementing UNDRIP is a good first start in achieving reconciliation as a recommendation for this committee to look at? And secondly, in 2017, the Liberal government announced $25 million over 4 years to support the Indigenous Guardians pilot program, and with it kind of sunsetting in 2021, I'm wondering if you think it's been effective. Do you believe that when Indigenous nations are able to co-manage the resources, that that's one of the best practices? And I'll leave that open to open it up to you guys for that answer. Short answers, if you could, so I could hear from everyone.
I can. I'll open the. UNDRIP, I think, can be helpful, but it really needs to be not unlike the existing legislation in the federal government, it hasn't mattered that there are laws that actually prevent the kind of things happening that we're talking about. But it happens anyway. And UNDRIP really doesn't mean anything without a strategy of how to actually implement what it says and what it intended. So I think that I'm happy to hear the provincial government and the federal government actually tabling a piece of legislation, but it remains to be seen on what kind of action follows. I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Chamberlain.
Thank you. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is critical. We need to see that go forward. We need to see it be enacted in a broad way. We need it to be, we can't wait. I mean, we can't wait until everything is finally in place and we're going to be able to move forward. We have to identify the areas where there's opportunity to implement components of it, and especially in situations like the critical state of Pacific salmon. And in doing so, we're going to bring the Canadian public along about why not to fear what free, prior, and informed consent can represent. Because we've seen across this country and around the world the need for more stringent environmental considerations. And that's something First Nations have been struggling to advance for generations. And so I think that we could then start to exemplify to the electorate that this is beneficial and it's a quicker path to certainty. Thank you.
Chief McNeil.
I'd encourage everyone not to look at it so much as implementing the declaration as a whole. I'll draw your attention to, let's implement Article 18, for example, our right to be involved in decision-making that affects our rights. Article 19, about seeking our free, prior, informed consent. If we did those two articles, we'd move the system a long way. And I'd encourage you to think of that context. So it's something real in front of us, not big and broad. In terms of the Guardians, we used to have the Guardian program here in Stalo Country, and we did a really effective job of not only managing others, in managing ourselves in a way that nobody else could manage us. So absolutely, that 25 million over 5 years, that needs to grow and, build more programs. And it shouldn't only be about fish, it should be about wildlife and conservation writ large as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Adolph, did you have a comment? Yes.
Yes, actually what I was going to say is that I think it would be one step towards reconciliation, but I think the ultimate step in regards to reconciliation is to really take a look at why are we in this predicament we are, and it's all because of the doctrine of discovery. And basically with Pope Alexander the Sixth in 1493, when he drafted up this doctrine of discovery, and a couple of the words that he had in the doctrine is he referred to Indigenous people as heathens and infidels, and we didn't have a soul, thus we weren't people. And this is what government used, and this is what the courts used throughout the court case, is terra nullius, that the land was empty. So I really think in order for us to actually move forward in regards to reconciliation is that the government must get the Vatican to retract the doctrine of discovery so that we can move on equally. But with that doctrine of discovery, we're held down as heathens and infidels, and we aren't people, and thus the Indian Act.
Thank you, Mr. Batiste. Your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Mr. Chamberlain again. In 2019, the federal government announced an Atlantic SEAL task team, but they've yet to announce anything similar on the Pacific coast. Recently, I've learned that there's a hypothesis out there pertaining to steelhead, which are in dire trouble in the Thompson and the Nechako systems. And the hypothesis is around the predation in the inshore areas. And it was estimated that a doubling of the survival rate from predation in the inshore areas could lead to up to an almost 500% increase in return rates. what are the views of the First Nations Wild Salmon Alliance on the pinniped populations on BC's west coast, and do BC First Nations have a history of harvesting pinnipeds?
I've heard from many First Nations the concerns about the pinnipeds. It's kind of a fun word to say, actually. But you can see the prevalence around them. I've seen video footage of them being within herring nets and causing a lot of damage and so forth. What we're focusing on, though, is we're focusing on the 1 to 4% that actually return in this line of questioning. And what I think we need to do is to identify the areas that we can ensure there's a vast amount of smolts getting to the ocean. So the 1 to 4% that come back are extremely meaningful in comparison to what we've had today. And I know that our people, we've harvested them in our past. They're part of our regalia making. And certainly we're always open to exercise our Aboriginal rights in whatever manner that may be.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to Ms. Morton now, and I'm sorry for mistaking you that you were with one of the First Nations band. It was the way the meeting notice sheet was printed off today. I misread it.
That's my husband's side.
Okay. Ms. Morton, in 2012, the previous government introduced Canada's first national standards for wastewater treatment that were to be fully implemented by the end of this year. When the current Environment Minister, Minister Wilkinson, was the Fisheries Minister, he himself stated that untreated wastewater is the largest source of contamination in the Salish Sea, while the Cohen report warned that effluents pose threats to salmon stocks. Now that Minister Wilkinson is deferring the implementation of treatment standards down the road, and this is what he's what he is doing is delaying protection and conservation of aquatic habitats like the Fraser River estuary that fish stocks need to survive. As a streamkeeper, what is your perspectives on the need for national minimum standards for sewage and wastewater treatment?
Yeah, I can't imagine that we would allow sewage into our wild spaces, but it happens every day. In North Vancouver, our sewage treatment plant was going to change from tertiary and go upwards, and it was one of our local streamkeepers that led the charge on getting that into having like a substantial increase in the amount of debris that's going to be taken out of the water before entering into our wild spaces. We cannot count on dilution anymore to be the solution. We can be the solution by taking out the pieces that we know about.
Okay, thank you, and I'll stay with you for this one as well. We saw the Cohen Commission came out of the record low salmon returns in 2009, and then in 2010 we saw record returns of Fraser River sockeye, and again in 2014 that the numbers were high. To me, that indicates that in-stream habitat conditions are there to still produce those record numbers of fish. Do you see that the interior or freshwater habitat has changed dramatically in that time, or would you think that there may be other factors at play in the marine environment that may be having more effect?
We have that combination of the marine environment as well as the freshwater. Freshwater we can deal with a little bit more. I do know that this year the water levels in the Shuswap were so high that I was unable to do any training. And so we have the high water, which has not been in the past. That's not been the case. Kamloops is getting flooded and debris, silts and stuff is coming down because of the response to the pine beetle, because of taking that out and then the wildfires that happened afterwards. The cyclical effect of the fish need to be taken into consideration as well. We have low times that are supposed to be low and high times that are supposed to be low, and sometimes they can move about. But we'd sure like to find out and get a little bit more curious when things go bad. Chum salmon didn't turn up last year, but we haven't heard a big fuss about them. I hear they're not as tasty as the sockeye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. You're going a little bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and fascinating testimony given over the last almost 2 hours. But would it be fair to analyze as well as that DFO, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, is not all of the problem, and they do not have control over all of the solutions? Because I've heard different testimony coming from several witnesses that there's issues that are not under the control of DFO that are having a significant negative impact on salmon stocks. Would you care to opine? Oh, yes. Mr. Chamberlain?
There are many different impacts, and Colin was very clear about that. And certainly some of them are federal and some of them are provincial. And I think that really begs the need to have federal, provincial, First Nations working together to address this situation. But I want to draw your attention to the precautionary principle. And this is what was the basis of the LOU to remove fish farms in the Roughton Archipelago. So we have the province of British Columbia stepping up and meaningfully safeguarding wild salmon environment by implementing precautionary principle as identified by the First Nations. And there's nothing different going on in the Discovery Islands in that regard. And we're going to see whether the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is going to be able to follow suit and enact the same precautionary principle to safeguard what we have already identified and nobody can deny is critically declining Fraser River fish. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Morton, you used a reference as well as Mr. Edlund.
I think if we can get the provincial and federal governments working together with First Nations to that common goal, we'll go a long ways. I was on the aquaculture committee meetings the other day, though, and there was talk about land-based aquaculture. And then the fellows were saying, well, we need a pipe to bring the salt water in, and then we need a pipe to take the effluent out and put in the salt water. So it's a matter of actually having an interest in solving the problem, not just moving it around.
A question to Chief McNeil. Chief McNeil, you used reference allowing us to manage ourselves. You're referring to First Nations. And could you elaborate on that a bit? Because you indicated in your discussion when you were managing yourselves more, there was more successful results. Did I interpret you correctly?
But it's twofold. One is the managing ourselves around the guardian program. So we actually had our own citizens trained to be guardians.
And you don't have that anymore, Chief?
No, the funding ran out, and it's all proposal based now.
So, and how long has that happened? Like, what's the timeline between when you were managing yourself?
From the early 90s up until the late 90s, early 2000s. And then from then, it's been purely DFO.
And when you compare those two periods, in the period when you were managing yourself, could you just paint a picture for the committee here on what the state of the stock was and how you've seen it versus now when you're no longer involved in that management process?
Let me be clear. In that component of management, it's about managing and monitoring the access during fisheries. So in the 90s, there's still abundance, and not as much as there was in the 70s and 80s, but still lots for us, for recreational, for sporties, and commercial. So we were working with our citizens who were transitioning from, when we're hungry, we would go out and fish for the table, to lesser runs, especially the early Stewart. That's when they started to decline. So we had to really monitor ourselves. So we did it effectively by working with people, with fishers, with communities. But now with DFO, in their management approaches, charge as many of us as they can. Make sure it takes if we don't plead guilty, it takes 5 to 7 years in court to finally come to whatever the decision is by the court. So that's by default DFO's approach on management now, is tying us up in court. We lose our jobs. So, we don't want to say we're guilty because we're not guilty. So we have to keep going to court. And it's hugely problematic. They take our boats, our trucks. They take everything from us. Whereas when Rex and others are caught, they don't do that.
Could you just explain to me, I'm an East Coaster, what would be a charge that would be laid against you now in this environment that would not have occurred when you were managing the resource?
When we were managing the resource, say one of our members was caught fishing out of licensed times. We'd go in there, we look at him, he's in complete poverty. His family is in complete poverty, so it's an absolute sustenance fishery. So then, rather than taking his boat if he had one or his net if he had one, we then work with the community that he's from, because there are social supports available that could be brought to bear under the right conditions. So it was more of a social support, encouraging, supporting, as opposed to the purely punitive position that DFO manages with.
And
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. It's gone about 10 seconds over. We now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes, please. You're on mute, Madam Gill.
On a dit à un autre député, mais bon.
They said to another MP, and I was waiting to hear confirmation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Adolph. He wanted to answer my question, and I was afraid that I did not ask the question with the proper wording. So first, there is the hypothesis of salmon extinction. There's also people who are worried about traditional food patterns. So these are motives that could lead to dissatisfaction from First Nations. And I would like to know if they have some concerns on the short and long term. I also wonder if this can be similar to what happened in Nova Scotia with the Mi'kmaq. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news and start mentioning crises, but I would like to know if this is possible in your opinion.
And actually, what I was going to mention in regards to taking a look at the situation that was happening on the East Coast and in comparison for the West Coast, and that I think really what occurred on the East Coast was that there was a long lag of time that it took for the federal government to actually look at implementing the court case and what kind of erupted into this situation for the lobster. And so when we take a look at that context in the East Coast with the West Coast, really what we need to look at is the court cases that have recognized our right to fish. And we need to actually move these forward so that we could actually become part of the solution in relation to management. And what I was going to also mention earlier is that we have two paradigm shifts that are competing. And like within our culture, our values and our principles in Haklip here in Fountain, it's we take only what we need. But when we take a look at the situation in regards to where the environment we're in, it's in a capitalist society, and so what happens in a capitalist society is there's exploitation of the resources compared to taking a look at our need for the fish and looking at taking only what we need, knowing that the fish is going to feed the bears, going to feed the eagles, and in turn that's going to be carried into the forest, and where the old growth forest is going to flourish. But what we also need to take a look at, building on Mr. Chamberlain, is that provincially we need to take a look at how best do we manage the forest so that we're not going to take out the old growth forest, and so that the fish will come up and replenish the old growth forest, and then the bears will come, the eagles will come. But right now everything is collapsing. The whole ecosystem is collapsing because of the state of the fishery.
Thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns to finish off for 2.5 minutes, please.
Right now, I believe this is a watershed moment where if the minister doesn't take emergency action with emergency investments, without implementing urgent policy, without a salmon recovery plan that includes, obviously led by Indigenous people, this minister could be the minister that oversees the collapse of wild Pacific salmon, or she can be the minister that helps bring salmon back. I'm going to ask you, do you believe that's true, that this is the pivotal moment right now? And I'm going to ask each of you just a yes or no, and I'll start with you, Ms. Morton.
Yes, we've had lots of moments, but this is the time.
Wickeninish?
Yeah.
Chamberlain? Mr. Chamberlain?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Adolph?
Yes, and I included it in my submission on the third paragraph, infamous legacy of this government. They allowed collapse.
Chief McGill.
We have the extinguishment of a Section 35 right in front of us right here.
It's a question for Wickeninish and for Chief McGill.
So here's the clerk. I don't know if anyone can hear me, but we cannot hear anyone here in the room. Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Mr. Johns, you have 1 minute and 8 seconds.
It's a question for Wiggininish. We heard in the Supreme Court, in the court case of Housett versus Canada, that the judge said that the Indigenous and the local management of the fisheries was much superior to local DFO. Can you talk about how systemic racism has come into play that impacts, the management of fishery stocks?
Yeah, very briefly, it's something that really we haven't dwelt on too much in this particular discussion, even though it's alive and well. And I want to cite one of our representatives from Heshkut, which is part of the Takwiak table, who overheard 2 DFO officials talking about how that the government has dealt with the Indigenous problem. How do they do that? Well, they don't have any more wild stocks. And we know they don't eat farm fish. And they're gloating about that. This is our employees of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And we leveled that charge to the government in our negotiations, formally in a press statement that really didn't get a lot of traction. But it's real. And somebody needs to wake up and say, we can't have racism in management of aquatic resources. But I know it's alive and well. And so do many other First Nations, as has been presented here on occasion. But we really don't spend a lot of time. Nobody has stood up and say, zero tolerance. I asked the question, why not? Is it because it's okay to have those policies in place that negatively impact our way of life as a people? If I hear a resounding no, I'll say yes. But I hear nothing.
Thank you, Gord. The time has gone well over. I'll thank our witnesses for the insightful testimony, and both in your opening statements and in the response to the questions. I've found it most interesting this evening, listening to it from both sides. We'll allow the witnesses now to sign off, and we'll just do a very small bit of committee business before we say good evening for the day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, I think the witnesses are all gone. You've all been sent a copy of the budget that was circulated by the clerk. We need approval for that. I don't know if I can just ask, do I have unanimous consent for the supplementary amount requested of $3,100? And that's necessary in order to be able to supply our witnesses with equipment that are going to be appearing. I see thumbs up all the way around. I don't see any thumbs down. So I'll take that an advisement that it's passed unanimously, Nancy, so you can go ahead with that. There's just one thing I wanted to say to the members of the committee. When we're in the questioning part of our committee meeting with witnesses, I would ask to try and identify who you're asking the question to. Your time is your own and you can do as you want with it. I shouldn't have to manage the time for the individuals who are asking questions. Identify whether it's John Q or Betty B or whoever that you want to answer it, because sometimes the witnesses just stay there looking at the screen, the same as we're doing, but nobody is saying anything. And your time is running out as nobody is speaking. It's your time is getting used with no response. So keep in mind in the future to try and identify who you want to answer the question in particular, because if not, it's like somebody said, you got dead ear. So keep that in mind. I hate jumping in and using your time to identify this witness that may have their hand up or another witness. So it's your time. You manage it how you see fit. I'll tell you when your time is up, of course, as always. And I know we do be a little bit free on it at times. So again, thank you to everybody. Thank you to the clerk and the analysts and the translators and our own individual staff for another very insightful and interesting meeting. I'll now adjourn the meeting and wish everybody, of course, a Merry Christmas and happy and safe New Year when we meet again. Goodbye, all.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Have a good holiday.